Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we continue speaking about comparison of adjectives. In particular, we'll speak about comparative adjectives that are often confused by English learners. We'll start with the adjective old, which has two forms in the comparative degree: older and elder. Let's see. The adjective old can have two comparative degrees. We can have older or elder. In the superlative degree, we also have two forms, the oldest and the eldest. What is the difference? We use older and the oldest when we need to compare two things or two people and to say which of them exists longer in this world. Elder and the eldest are used to speak about people in one family, to say which of the sisters or the brothers or which family member lives longer on this earth. Apart from that, the word elder can be used as a noun to speak about an old person. Let's look at some examples with these comparative and superlative forms. She is much older than we are. This temple is older than previously believed. This is the oldest restaurant in the city. In these examples, we use the word old and its comparative form older and the superlative form oldest to show that the object or the person that we are talking about has existed for a longer period of time or has existed for the longest period of time. If we want to compare family members and to say who is the most experienced, who has lived the longest, we will have this option to use the word elder. For instance, my elder or my older brother works as a lawyer. My elder brother or the brother who is older than me. My great-grandma is the eldest member of the family. To use the word oldest in this context would be a little bit rude, because yes, she is the oldest person, but that's what we don't normally say about elderly people, about seniors. We say that she is the eldest person. She is an elder and she is the eldest among us. This we do when we compare ages of people. But in a sentence, she is an old lady. Old is fine. She is an old lady. She is older than my grandfather. She is older than our neighbors, for instance, but she is the eldest member of the family. Two more examples. The older members of the tribe mentor the younger ones. In this sentence, we use the word older to show the age of these people, without implying any hierarchy like we did in the previous example. We are not speaking about seniority, we are only speaking about the age of how many years a person has. The person that has lived the most mentors the younger generations, right? In this example, the elder members of the family gathered at the table. We use this elder to show this hierarchy, the most respected in the family, the eldest member, not just to indicate the age, the old members or the oldest members, but to show how they are related to other members in the family, to show their seniority, okay? This is the difference between older and elder and the oldest and the eldest. Other forms that are often confused are the superlative forms of the adjective late. We can say late, later, the latest, and late, later, the last. The latest stands for the most recent, the latest news, or the latest version of the program. The last stands for the final. The word lastest does not exist. There is no such form in English. Let's look at some examples. You can upgrade to the latest version of Android What are the latest news? The latest fashion trends for clothing are a mixture of retro and modern styles. So in these three examples, we are speaking about things that are the most recent, the freshest, news, models, and so on and so forth. Let's look at somewhat different examples. We took the last train from Glasgow. They were the last ones to board the ship. And Kyra went to Morocco last year. Pay attention to the last sentence. We don't say the last year, though obviously we are talking about the superlative form and we have a noun. So our intuition tells us that we should use the before the superlative form of the adjective, but this is not the case with the word last year, last month, last week, and so on and so forth. We don't use the article the. We just say last year. In these three last examples, we are using the word last as the synonym of the word final. We took the last train. There was no more trains to Glasgow that day. They were the last ones to board the ship. There were no people behind them. They were the last ones. And Kyra went to Morocco last year, the previous year, yeah? The final year of those that we have lived so far. Now let's take a closer look at the comparative form of the word late, later. Later means both more modern and the one that is closer to the end. Let's see. Despite the later hour, the owner has welcomed us warmly. In this case, later means not more modern, but the hour that was closer to the end of the day. Some new features were incorporated in the later version of the program. Here, vice versa, we're speaking about more modern version, right? A version that was more recent, a newer version of the program. This costume probably inspired a later fashion of wearing skirt trousers. The comparative adjective later here is used as more recent, more modern. You may fill in the form on our website at a later date. At a later date means later, in the future. Using a sunscreen when you are young prevents skin problems in later life. Again, in the future, in the years to come. We should also keep in mind that later is also an adverb. Let's compare these two sentences. He took to photography in later life, and he took to photography later in life. In the first sentence, later is an adjective. In later life, what kind of life? Later life, yeah? That period of time in his life that was closer to the end of his life. In the second sentence, later in life, later is an adverb. It takes a different place in the sentence, right? Other examples of later as an adverb. See you later, James. Or let's talk about it later. Here, later is an adverb. Apart from late, later, latest, last, we have another word, which is latter. It is not a comparative form, but its existence in the language makes some English learners confused. Latter is the adjective that has the meaning opposite of the adjective former. So usually we use these two together. We say the former and the latter. The latter part of the book was harder to read. Here we are speaking about the second part of the book, the second of the two parts that this book has. During the latter half of his life, he lived modestly, ate simple vegetarian food, and undertook long fasts. Latter half, latter of the two, we have the former half of one's life and the latter half of one's life. Of course, we can say later in life he lived modestly, or in his later life. When we're speaking about two halves, as we're doing here, we have a former half and a latter half. we could go out or stay at home and watch a movie. I prefer the latter option. So here, two options were given, and the person preferred the latter option, or the second of the two. Apart from that, the word latter can be used as a noun. As a noun, it can refer to the last piece or to the last item in a series. For instance, they offered me a pay rise or a corporate car, and I chose the latter. The article shows us that this is a noun, and I chose the latter. That means the last of the options that were given to me. Let's look at some sentences where latter and last are used, and let's figure out the difference between the sentences. I can offer a brownie or a piece of apple strudel to the tea. Do you prefer the former or the latter? I had soup, mashed potatoes with fried fish, and Greek salad for dinner. The last was not fresh. They prefer ferries to planes because the latter are less eco-friendly. And they took 3 trains to get to Trieste, and the last was the worst. So as you see, in some of these sentences we use the word latter, while in others we used last. Why? Because we prefer to use the word latter when there is the word former. Not necessarily mentioned, but understood. Yeah, so we understand that there are two things, the former and the latter. That often happens when we have two halves of something, or two options between which we should choose. The word last is preferred when we have a long series of something. In the second example, for instance, we are talking about different dishes, Greek salad being the last dish mentioned, the last of the 3. So when it's more than 2, we prefer last. Now I would like to clarify the difference between two adjectives that are often confused. These adjectives are little and small. What is the difference? Are they absolutely interchangeable? No, they are not. Little means not big in size or quantity, or not old. Small means not big in size. We are not speaking about the age here. If something is small, it's compact. This is what we should remember about the adjectives themselves. But there is a little confusion when it comes to the comparison of these adjectives. The comparative and superlative degrees of little are small and smallest. Okay? The forms littler and littlest are only used to speak about kids. Let's look at some examples. That's a small or a little apartment. These two adjectives here are interchangeable because we are speaking about the size of this apartment. My apartment is much smaller than yours. As we need the comparative form, and we are talking about the size, we take smaller. My apartment is smaller than yours. Not littler, okay? This apartment is the smallest in the block, not the littlest, because again we are speaking about the size and we compare this apartment with the rest of the apartments in this house, so we need to take the superlative form, and the superlative form is the smallest. But Tim is the littlest boy in the village. He is the youngest boy in this village. There is one more thing that I have to say about the place of these adjectives in a sentence. Small can be used in front of a noun or after a copular verb. For instance, we used to live in a small town. Here, small is used before the noun town. The cat is small for its age. Here it is used after the copular verb to be, is small. Little is normally used only in front of nouns. So we can say it's a little car, but we should not say this car is little. In addition to that, small can be used with quite, rather, very, and too. We can say, I had a rather small portion of porridge for breakfast. Or, these shoes are too small for me. or the Chihuahua is a very small dog breed. Little should not be used with these words, so we should not say, I had a rather little portion of porridge for breakfast. I had a rather small portion of porridge for breakfast. Then, small is normally not used with other adjectives in front of it, while little can be preceded by another adjective. For instance, we cannot say they have a nice small garden behind the house, but we can say I have bought a pretty little vase in that antique store. A pretty little vase. That's okay. And the cartoon is about a curious little duckling who can't stay focused on anything. Now, another problematic adjective, the comparative and superlative forms of which often confuse English learners, is the adjective far. We can say far, farther, the farthest, and far further, the furthest. Far farther, the farthest means more distant physically. And far further, the furthest means more distant physically and metaphorically. And it also means in addition. Let's look at some examples. We'll start with the sentences in which we can use both farther via a and further via u. The road ends here. We can't drive any farther or further. There is no difference, as we are speaking about a physical distance, so you can use both options. I took a seat farthest or furthest from the door and closest to the stove. Again, no difference between these two forms. Let's walk a little farther or further and see where this lane ends. The same story, we are speaking about the distance, so both options are relevant. But if we're gonna speak about abstract things, about distances that are not physical, but rather metaphorical, we are going to use the words further and furthest via you. Let's see. Looking further down the road, the chance of rain for Monday night is 50%. What road are we talking about? Here we are not talking about a particular road down which we are driving. We are talking about some future. This is an idiomatic expression, looking further down the road, looking in the future, right? Ask questions to clarify your understanding and elicit further information. Here, further means additional information, and the subject could be studied further in the future. What do we want to say? We want to say that the subject will be studied in more detail. There will be additional studies of the subject in the future. The last couple of words that are often confused are less and lesser. Lesser is an adjective formed from less, but is not a true comparative. Though you see this end in er, it's not a comparative form. So less is not the positive form, it's a comparative form, yeah, little less. But lesser is an adjective in its positive form, and it's not a comparative form, okay? Lesser means not so great, and as it is not a comparative form, it cannot be followed by than, so we cannot compare anything using the form lesser. Let's see. The economy is dependent on government spending and, to a lesser extent, assistance from foreign donors. And to a not so great degree, from foreign donors, right? Marginalized classes are those classes which have been considered as people of lesser importance by other groups. Why do we always have to choose the lesser of two evils in politics? This is an idiom, the lesser of two evils. So we use this form not to compare literally two things, yeah, but to say that something is not so great as something else without comparing these things or people. Less can function as an adverb, as a determiner, and as a pronoun. Let's see. She's less emotional than I am. I am more emotional. Here, less is an adverb. I am less emotional, right? You should eat less sweets if you want to be healthy. Here, less is a determiner, less sweets. As we can conclude, Less shows reduction. It shows us a less extensive degree of something. While lesser is just an adjective, it means not so great, and that's it. One more thing that we shouldn't overlook is the adjective near in the expression in the near future. Yes, the correct way is to say in the near future, not in the nearest future, as many English learners say. Though the nearest future may sound correct, grammatically it does not exist. Let's look at some examples with in the near future. Let's hope the treaty will enter into force in the near future. One problem that is likely to arise in the near future is the impact of climate change. Some jobs are at risk of being taken over by AI in the near future. And it is time to think of what might lay ahead of us in the near future. Instead of this in the near future, which doesn't actually tell us anything, because what future are we talking about? What is the near future? Is it tomorrow? Is it in a month? So instead of this expression, we can use soon. Soon sounds more concise. There will be a little test in the end of this class, but before the test, the last thing I want to mention is that there are some adjectives that cannot be compared, and I want to speak about them here as well because they might constitute a problem for some English learners. Among those adjectives that cannot be compared, that cannot have comparative or superlative degrees, first and foremost are those adjectives that already represent the greatest degree of something. These are such adjectives as perfect, enormous, gigantic, complete, infinite, total, fatal, flawless, empty, unique, and so on and so forth. How could you possibly use any of these adjectives in comparative or superlative forms? If something is perfect, it's already the greatest degree of goodness, so you cannot say the perfect test. Neither can you say that something is the most enormous, because it's already enormous. Enormous is an adjective that expresses the greatest size, yeah? So the biggest something is enormous. So here we are speaking about such adjectives that cannot express any degrees of comparison because they already express the quality that is of the greatest degree. Another group of adjectives that cannot be compared are those adjectives that cannot express comparative forms due to what they mean. For instance, these are such adjectives as single, married, mortal, immortal, rectangular, triangular, wooden, marble, gold. So statuses, shapes, materials, and so on and so forth. A person cannot be more or less single. He or she is single and that's it, right? Another group is adjectives that express nationalities. A person cannot be more or less Italian or more or less Chinese. So British, Italian, Argentinian, Bulgarian, Swedish, Finnish, Georgian, Indian, any nationality you take, you cannot compare nationalities. And the last group is adjectives that express colors. We spoke about this in this lesson, though sometimes you can compare colors. If you remember my example with the yellow square, you can say that this square is yellower than this one, for instance. But generally speaking, we consider adjectives that express colors to have no degrees of comparison. Yellow, blue, green, white, black, crimson, golden, burgundy, and so on and so forth. These are all colors, and we don't normally use colors in comparative and superlative forms. Now, to finish our class, let's take a little test. You need to open the brackets and choose the appropriate form of the adjective. Write the sentences down, make your choices, and let's check the answers with me. The latest news are disturbing. The latest, right? The freshest news. We were late for the dinner yesterday. We use late to show that we were not on time. We were late. The last chapter for the book made me cry. The last chapter means the final chapter of the book. For further information, Call this number. Further is the synonym of the word additional. For additional information, call this number, please. This teapot is little, but that one is even smaller. Remember that when we want to compare the sizes of two little things, we use the forms smaller and the smallest. So, this teapot is little, but that one is even smaller. We don't use littler here, as we're not speaking about the age. Older people are more weather sensitive. We are not talking about hierarchy here, not talking about family members and how their ages are related to each other. We are speaking about how old the person is, how many years he or she has lived. My elder sister is 3 years older than I am. My elder sister, so here we have some hierarchy, yeah? She is older than me, she is my elder sister. There is a nice restaurant further and farther down the street. Both options are possible as we are speaking about the physical distance. And the last sentence, I tried on 2 skirts. The latter one was a bit too short. The latter of the two, the former and the latter, remember? So this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and you managed to learn something new. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section down below. Subscribe to this channel and see you in the next lesson.